Hey everybody, welcome back. And if you're new, thanks for stopping by. If you have tuned in before, you might recognize this as my wife's PC or my old PC, and you would be correct. But I never reviewed on how it performs in 2021. So, today I'd like to test it out and see if it would be a good budget build for 2021, especially for those looking to get into PC gaming and don't have a whole lot of money. I built this PC about 6 years ago or so, but had the processor for just a little bit longer than that. I just upgraded everything else approximately 6 years ago. It has an AMD FX 8350, which is an 8-core processor with a base clock of 4.0 GHz, a Gigabyte RX 480, 8 GB version, with a fan stop feature, which personally I do not like, and I'll explain a little more on that later. Alongside of those, there is 16 gigabytes of HyperX Fury DDR3 RAM clocked at 1600 MHz, MSI 970A Pro Gaming Carbon motherboard, and an EVGA 850 watt power supply as of a couple weeks ago. Yes, this is the power supply that was in my Plex server, which you saw in a previous video, but it currently didn't need all that power, and the power supply that was in this PC wasn't keeping up with the power needs, shutting down sometimes when I tried to play more demanding games. Sometimes they weren't totally that demanding, but still, shutting down in the middle of gaming is not a fun experience. I probably could have gotten away with something that's around 600 or 650 watts in here, but I didn't have anything else available, and I really didn't want to spend any money. I'll worry about the Plex server's power supply in the future once I get my other hard drives fixed in the near future. So, now that you all know the specs, I'll dive into some gaming, test it out, then I'll go over what these parts or similar parts cost in 2021 versus some pre-built PCs that are currently on the market. GPUs are a hot commodity, so sometimes you can get better deals on a pre-built right now, as I did with my Alienware with the Ryzen 7 3700X and the RTX 3070. I only paid $1,100, but they aren't always what they seem, as the Alienware does have its downsides, as you can't really upgrade the CPU to a newer 5000 series CPU unless you buy a whole new motherboard. Anyway, let's get into those games. Before I get into my Rocket League experience, I did want to mention that all the games I test today are ran at 1080p, unless I state otherwise. There won't be any 4K action here, and I really didn't expect to get it with any game with the age of the hardware in this PC. Anyway, on to Rocket League. Now I know Rocket League isn't a game everyone plays, but it is a lot of fun, and can pretty much run on anything, even a potato. At first, I wasn't having the best experience. I was only seeing about 10 to 15 FPS for the lower 1%, which I could definitely notice with some screen tearing, and as well with some frame drops here and there. With a fast-paced game like Rocket League, those are things you really don't want to see. I tried messing around with the settings, even going to the lowest settings possible, or the higher performance option in the game menu. This really didn't seem to help at all, and I was still seeing the screen tearing and the frame drops. For some reason, even though I only have a 60Hz monitor, turning up the frame rate cap in game seemed to do the trick. So, I turned it up to 144 FPS, and as soon as I did that, the screen tearing and frame drops were gone. I managed to get the settings back all the way to the highest quality settings in the game menu, and it was smooth as butter. So, something with this game doesn't like to have the frame rate match the refresh rate of the monitor. I don't know if this is true for everyone, but from my research and personal experience, seems to be the case for many others and myself, and need to set it higher than your refresh rate to get the best performance out of it. I also knew I could run this game at high quality settings, as I used to play it on this machine before, but it has been years since I used this PC for Rocket League, and I did upgrade to an NVIDIA 1070 about 4 years ago, so knew I was missing something, and I finally figured it out. My frame rate was now running around 110 frames per second on average, with a lower 1% of around 40 frames per second. I know it says 13 frames for the lower 1%, but I forgot to restart the frame analyzer after adjusting the settings, so you'll just have to take my word on that. Moving on from Rocket League, let's go back to my old friend, Dirt Rally 2.0. I started on the lowest settings here, which in Dirt, it is ultra low, and the game played really well. I lost the video footage for the ultra low settings, so I'm only showing the low settings currently. Now, the graphics are PlayStation 2-esque, but I was able to play and get through multiple stages without any issues, and even get some high times versus my other PC. Kind of odd if you ask me, but maybe it was my nostalgia kicking in from the old Gran Turismo 1, 2, and 3 days on the PS1 and PS2. I was seeing about 119 frames on average, and a lower percent of 90-ish frames, so really not bad at all. When I tried to up the settings to medium, that's when things got a bit stuttery and sluggish, started seeing frame drops, so keeping them at low was the best experience on this hardware. While it doesn't look the best on low and ultra low settings, it is playable, even if you're on a budget. Next up for the gaming testing is our good old friend GTA 5. Now at first, I tried just doing high settings and turning on MSAA or multi-sample anti-aliasing, but as you can see there was stuttering, frame drops, and hitching right off the bat. This game is just over 8 years old and should be able to perform decently on high with this hardware, so I immediately knew it had to be something to do with the anti-aliasing. So I just simply turned off MSAA. As soon as I did that, everything smoothed out and was playable. I saw an average frame rate in the lower 60s and the FPS for the lower 1% in the higher 40s. I really couldn't complain, so again, another game that was playable on this hardware, giving me hope for even newer games. I did cycle between TSAA being on and off, but that really didn't seem to impact the performance much, and was seeing about the same frame rates either way, so glad I could get some form of anti-aliasing to smooth out the jagged edges. Since those three games were all performing pretty well, I thought, what is something sorta new in my library, and it's a more demanding game even for newer cards? How about Shadow of the Tomb Raider? We all know this is a go-to when people test out RTX card and turn on ray tracing. Well, I definitely won't be able to get that feature on this card, but I definitely could try lowering the settings and try to play it on this older hardware. It does meet the minimum requirements, so why wouldn't it work? Well, as you can see at 1080p, there were some frame drops everywhere. While I could manage playing through these drops and stuttering, it wasn't fun, and pretty annoying. At this point, I almost just gave up and said, it's not going to be playable on this hardware. But knowing it was well above the minimum requirements, I couldn't give up. So I decided to change from 1080p and set the graphics setting to 720p, and just kept the settings on low. Once I set it to 720p, everything was quite smooth and the noticeable frame drops were gone. I was seeing about 80 frames on average and a lower 1% in the high 30s. Again, it's not the greatest to look at, but I could play the game, enjoy the story, and the gameplay without stuttering or frame drops. I actually got quite into it during my testing and lost track of time because I was enjoying it that much. Again, it must be the PS1 and PS2 nostalgia that was kicking in. That said, if you have similar hardware, there's a very high chance you could get most newer games to run as long as the machine meets or beats the minimum requirements. Just try a lower resolution if 1080p isn't working, and it might just do the trick for you. In conclusion, sometimes running games at 1080p might not work on older hardware, but in most cases today, it did. Lowering the resolution or turning off anti-aliasing for newer games that may be experiencing frame drops or stuttering, especially on a system that meets or beats the game's requirements, might be the ticket to get them running smoothly for you. Just simply turning down the graphics settings sometimes doesn't always do the trick, as you saw. I'm really glad I didn't give up on Tomb Raider, because I know there will be a day that comes when my wife says, "This game is running poorly," and I will hopefully be able to get it working for her as long as the game's minimum requirements aren't higher than her PC specs. I don't think there are many games out there that it won't run, but no, there are a few it definitely won't. My suggestion is, if you are looking to play a specific game or build a PC to play a certain game, to always check the minimum requirements of that game and go a little above those. It may not look the best on a budget PC, but you can still enjoy the games and get lost from reality for a while. I will admit, I am a sucker for good visuals and graphics most of the time, but when I was playing on this machine, I was really enjoying the games. I sort of forgot I was playing on this machine a few times while testing, and the graphics became the least of my worries. Crashing the car, missing the block, scoring a goal, or just not dying became my biggest concerns. It honestly kind of reminded me that graphics aren't everything. It's more about the experience and the enjoyment of playing the game. Now that I've gone over how it stands up to some games in 2021, what would it realistically cost in 2021 to build a similar machine? I will do my best to make this quick and go over an estimated cost on how much you would have to spend on something similar. Firstly, you are going to need a case. Unfortunately, I cannot find the one I have anywhere, but I did find a new Antake case that comes with 4 fans for $65, that is US dollars. That's a pretty good deal since you wouldn't need to purchase any intake or exhaust fans, and you could always upgrade the fans in the future, but would be a good start. Next up, the motherboard. For the MSI 978 Pro Gaming Carbon motherboard, I searched sold listings on eBay, as finding it on other websites seemed to have a much higher cost. Under the sold listings on eBay, I saw one sold for as low as $60, which included RAM. Not sure on the speed of the RAM, but that's a pretty good deal if you ask me. It might save you money with not having to purchase any RAM. However, prices can quickly go up to about $225, so I'd say about $140 is the middle ground for a motherboard. Then, you're going to need a CPU to put in your motherboard. And if you go with the FX8350, you're looking anywhere from $65 to $130, which the one for $130 had a cooler on it already, but on average would be about $98. And if you got the cooler with one, then you don't have to worry about buying a cooler, because those are kinda decent for the FX8350. If for some reason you don't get a CPU with a cooler, you can always get a decent CPU cooler for about $30 minimum, like this Enermax cooler, which is basically what I have in my machine. I just added a second fan to mine for a push-pull configuration. If the motherboard you found did come with any RAM, you'll need to find some. Again, I checked eBay's sold listings for 16 GB of HyperX Fury RAM and saw it going anywhere from $30 to $70, or on average of about $50. So, you might even go with 8 GB of RAM, or if you want more, you might want to spend more. But this is just going over what you could spend on a similar system to mine. And of course, you're going to need a GPU. This is where things are going to get a little pricey because right now GPUs are a hot commodity. The RX 480, exactly like mine that I found under sold listings on eBay, went for $300. But you probably could get away with something that is a different brand or a slightly older GPU and maybe spend only around $200, possibly lower. Just please don't go with the GT 710. They are garbage. Earlier in the video, I did mention I don't like the Gigabyte version of this GPU as it has a fan stop feature. The reason I don't like it is because the fan stop feature was causing the system to crash as the card would get too hot before the fans were even effective. I ended up editing the fan curve in MSI Afterburner to get it to turn on at all times and slowly increase the speed as the temps went up. Before that, the fans wouldn't turn on until the card reached about 75°, and before the fans could start cooling it down, it already reached 90°, and the PC would just crash. There are other brands like MSI and Asus that make this same RX 480, so just shop around as there are sometimes great deals out there. For storage, I have a 500 gig M.2 drive, which I only paid about $50 for as it was on sale. However, they aren't always that low. You can look around for regular SSDs or even a HDD, hard disk drive, if you don't mind longer load times. If you do go with an HDD, you probably can get a terabyte for about $50, possibly even less. But just do some shopping around, as sometimes you can also find great deals on them. You also are going to need an operating system. Now, if you're tech savvy like me, you might just go with Linux and install with Linux. Personally, I don't use Linux, I use Windows 10. Now, Windows 10 isn't too much, it's about $100 if you buy an OEM key. However, if you have a Windows 7 or 8 key, you don't even need to buy a Windows 10. You can just download the Windows 10 installer from the Microsoft website and just use one of those old keys. That way, you save $100. Or like I said, you can install Linux if you want to figure that out. Finally, you're going to need a power supply to power everything. You aren't going to need 850 watts for a system like mine, and should be good with something between 550 watts and 650 watts. However, I did find a similar 850 watt EVGA power supply on Amazon, going for 60 bucks currently, which isn't bad at all, but always shop around as there are better deals out there sometimes. Now, if you are shopping on eBay or any other secondhand site, just be sure to read the entire description, as some are malfunctioning or parts only or just don't work at all. So make sure they state the item works so you don't end up in a bad situation. If they don't have a lot of details, message the seller, ask them questions. You know, asking questions is better than just saying, oh, it probably works, as they might not mention that and end up with something that doesn't work and you're out the money. So, after adding up all the average prices of everything, minus windows, you'd be looking at spending around just under $700. $693 is what I came up with. However, if you bought windows, up that by 100 bucks, 793. Now, you might not want to spend that much, and again, these are average prices, so you might find stuff for cheaper and get a better deal, or even something a little bit more expensive than what I laid out, but in the end, it all depends on your current budget. Looking into similar pre-builts on the market, I found this HP pre-built that starts at $700. With the base specs, if you don't upgrade anything, you'll end up with a slower CPU, less storage, and less RAM. The GPU is better, however, that is the only thing, and might not be the best for you. However, you could upgrade it later, but will end up spending more money to match or beat what I've shown you today. One step up from that, I found this Skytech gaming pre-built. It goes for $770, and it has a Ryzen 5 3600X, which yes is better than the FX 8350. It has about 500 gigs of storage, which is on par, but again, it has the downside of a slower graphics card and less RAM. Now, the RAM is faster, but if you wanted to add another stick of RAM, you're going to end up paying a little bit more as it is newer RAM. So sometimes going with older hardware is more cost effective. I was going to add more pre-builts on here, but I noticed things that got a little bit better than these started jumping up to 900, 1000, or if you're like me and got a doorbuster deal on your Alienware R10, that was only 1100 bucks. And comparing that to some of these systems, even though the motherboard kind of sucks on the Alienware, they just didn't seem like good deals to me. And honestly, you can do your own research to see if you can find a better pre-built out there. There might be, because like I said, I paid 1100 bucks for that Alienware R10 with a Ryzen 7 3700X, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and a RTX 3070. So you really have to look and search and be the first one to try and get those deals, because I was lucky enough to get that one. But again, right now I'm not seeing anything worthwhile. I will link all the products I showed you previously here in the description down below, including both the pre-builts I mentioned and similar Alienwares to the one that I purchased back in February and still have currently. But this is going to be all for this video. I hope this helps some of you out, maybe make a decision on whether to look into a pre-built or try and find some secondhand hardware to build a machine for under 800 bucks, sometimes even under 700, or even lower than that. Who knows? Just do some searching, as I know you can find great deals out there. Like I said, I paid 1100 bucks for that R10 back in February. It was a doorbuster, but they do happen time to time. You just have to get in there first and make sure you have an account set up, your payment info saved in there, and a really fast finger to click through all the pages they make you go through before you get to the final confirm payment page. Again, you won't see the best graphics with a budget PC build, but you can play a lot of games with them. And even though the graphics might not look the best, you'll still have a lot of fun, as I showed you here. If you have any questions or comments, just be sure to leave them down below. I'll do my best to answer them all. Also, if you can hit that like and subscribe button, it would really help me out, and I'd really appreciate it. I thank you all for sticking around. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and take care.